probably need to buy. Are you going to do this? we need to yeah, we need to buy a portable one. Yeah, I'm a bit surprised at this one. Yeah, well, otherwise I'll do my best. Yeah. Do we need to register this? One, two. Okay, I'll give it a try. Okay, boy, it's weird. You know, it's my the first time I see everyone masked, so I feel like maybe giving a surgery seminar. All right, so welcome in Les Houches. I don't know if you know this, but you know, Lenka tried to express the importance of the school for France and Europe. It's really it's, you know, it's a real world equivalent of Hogwarts, right? This is where everyone learns it all. This has been the birthplace of many important ideas in physics and mathematics as well. It has been the place where many Nobel Prize made the discovery by discussing and inventing theories. It's hard to underestimate the importance of this place. Even in machine learning, there have been amazing events here. Jan LeCun himself says this is a place where you become a scientist. And so, well, you know, we wanted to make this school for you, but Muriel? Ah, great. You're saving my life. Well, I feel like a motivational speaker here. So who is in to learn something? Right? In movies, they always speak with a mic, I think.
Faut appuyer là. Pour
Je
la
sais pas,
lumière.
celui-là.
Ça, sinon il y a un casque.
Bon, ça c'est... Ça n'a pas l'air fondamental. Okay. Does it work? Is it working? You got something? Okay, that feels much better. All right, so let's start. So as I was saying, you know, we could not organize this 1 month school, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be interesting anyway. Oops. Oh, I'm anticipating a lot of fun here. Okay, so let's hope that it works. So, yes, now you see why they do this. Sure. Yeah, okay, I don't know. Well, let's give it a try. All right, so I have a bad feeling about this. So I'm supposed to start with somehow, I mean, the title of the lecture was supposed to be something like Statistical Physics and Machine Learning 101. And there are many things you could say and that could fit with this lecture, but it's more, I mean, it's not an historical lesson, but it's really about telling you about you know, how the field evolved from the last 30, 40 years and trying to review many of the results that were derived and telling you where we are and where we are not. So it might be boring for some of you, but you know, there's always one or two things that you picked up in these lectures. So, statistical physics and machine learning. Well, it started in '82 somehow with a seminal work from John Hopfield, who used something called the replica method from statistical physics to study something called the Hopfield model. It was not called the Hopfield model at the time. In fact, it was proposed by someone called Little. And that was the moment where people realized that there were some powerful techniques in StatPhys that were useful outside StatPhys. And it's really a remarkable paper. You should take a look at it. So what is this replica method? So the replica method is what will be the lecture today. And I'm sure many of you know the replica method. So who is perfectly aware of what it is and can master it? Okay, who heard about it? All right, good. So you all know about replica. Good. So the replica method is something that has been developed in statistical physics. It's usually credited to Sam Edwards, who introduced it in 75, 74. And if you track down where the ideas come from, he actually credits it to Mark Katz in a seminar that Mark Katz gave in 68. And there is no recording, no written account of the seminar except a citation. And it has been one of the most important tools that have been used by physicists in this business. And so I thought maybe we should start by this. And it's probably fitting to start with the replica method. Now, since there is 40 years of replica studies, even more, 45 something, that means even the whole school will not be enough to cover everything that has been done with the replica method. And I will not even be able to do it. It has its own set of specialties. So what I will do today is consider a very simple model, tell you what physicists mean when they say we want to solve the model, and tell you how they do it with the replica method. And then you will see the replica method is really weird. It's weird is maybe not the word. It's with physicists we are okay with not rigorous, but that is more than not rigorous. It's kind of questionable. And a large part of there have been quite a substantive amount of work from mathematicians to try to prove results derived by this method, including from these two randomly sampled mathematicians in the first row who did some amazing contribution. And I also want to tell you a bit how you can prove some of these results. Okay, and all this in the next 1 hour and a half. So of course, to do this, I cannot do this for a very complicated model. So we are going to consider a very simple one. It's probably ridiculously simple in the sense that you could solve the model in many, many ways. But I will do it with the replica method, and then I will tell you how we can do it rigorously. All right? Good? Okay, so this is the problem. We have n variables. These are spins, plus or minus ones. Everybody is confident, is okay with spins. That's not a trivial question. If you start like this in a machine learning audience, they're like, spin? You mean these are Rademacher variables? No, let's call them spins. Okay, so we have n spins. Oops, that will be fun. I is going from 1 to n. Of course, in machine learning, n is a small n is usually the number of samples. So let's forget about machine learning today. It's all about statistical physics. Now we are going to consider an energy cost, okay, which physicists insist on calling Hamiltonian. Okay, and our cost function will be given by this. That is called the Curie-Weiss model, the simplest model to describe the ferromagnetic the ferromagnet. And it's slightly too simple because there is no disorder, and the replica method is about dealing with disorder. So we are going to add some disorder. This is what I will do. We have this little term which is called the random field. hi will be sampled from a Gaussian. Okay, it's a field which we take once and for all. It's a quench variable for physicists, and we take it from a Gaussian distribution. Okay, this is called the random field Ising model, and it's also one of the most important models of statistical physics. It has been introduced by Larkin in 70-something, and it has been used for many, many applications. And disordered ferromagnet, supraconductivity, and everything. And it's not completely alien in the context of machine learning. That would be a Markov model with some priors here, but let's not go into this. All right, so we have a cost function. It contains some randomness. So let's depends on this vector h. And what do we want to do with it? Okay, so unless you are in the wrong conference, you should know about Boltzmann measure and Gibbs sampling and everything. So what we like to do in statistical physics is to say, fine, there is a temperature T, or an inverse temperature beta, and we just assume that we are looking to a problem where we are setting up configuration of spins with the following probability measure. Where Z is the normalization. Okay, all with me so far. And that will be the probability with which you observe a given configurations of spins. All right. Now, of course, as you know in statistical physics, the whole game of statistical physics is to compute Z, the partition function. Now, that's already interesting here, because you could be trying to compute this partition function by summing all of this. And you know, it's an interesting algorithmic problem. Of course, you know, a stupid way to do it is you compute the 2 to the n values of exponential minus beta, and then you take the cost function for this value, and then you sum all of them. That gives you z, and that's it, and voila. But that's a bad algorithm because it takes 2 to the n steps to do. But that's the algorithmic way. Now, what physicists have been doing, and why the replica method was invented, was precisely not to do this, not to think of this as an algorithmic problem, but to ask yourself, well, you know, in general, n is large, n is going to infinity or to the Avogadro number, but it's large enough for us. And so what we are really interested is what is going on when n is really, really large. And if you remember your lesson, what you are really interested in is this object, phi n, which is log z over, well, let's not call it phi n yet, log z over n. Right? In physics, we usually put a minus 1 over beta here, and it's called the free energy. But okay, let's not worry about it. So there is this log z over n, and this is a random variable. Okay, because right now, this is something that depends only, well, z is summing over all of the configuration, but this depends on the particular choice of h. Okay? For one set of random fields, this thing has a value. Right. Now, what physicists proposed was that maybe if you compute the expectation, the average, if you want, over the fields of this quantity, is the average free energy, if you want. Well, that's most properly a free entropy, but never mind this. That will be a more interesting quantity to compute. And interestingly, they said, well, why is it so? Because of a property called self-averaging, which, of course, for physicists is taken for granted. Self-averaging means, you know, you can compute the expectation of this object, because when n is large, even if you pick up some random choice of h, it will be close to its expectation. So it's okay to compute the expectation, because even if you don't average, anyway, it will be very close to expectation. And they call this self-averaging. Beautiful name. Right? And this is nice because then you have a quantity which is not a random variable. You just have to compute the average over the field of log z over n. So this is a very nice name. Of course, this is not the name that mathematicians use. They will say, no, no, no. What's actually going on is a property called concentration. And they will say that this is a random variable who concentrates on its mean. Or if you want that converge, there is a weak convergence of this quantity to its mean. It's convergence in probability. Okay, is this true? Of course, for physicists, it's true. In this case, it's actually very easy to prove that this is correct. Okay, this is true. In fact, it's a theorem. If you want to prove it, there are many ways. The simplest way is to use something called, I think here you can use something called the Gaussian Poincaré inequality, that tells you that the variance of this object will be given by 1 over n squared times n times the derivative of log z times the expectation. Well, let's write it. So it's easy to do this. I will not do it. But if you Google Gaussian concentration of Lipschitz function of Gaussians or Gaussian Poincaré inequality, you will see that it's easy to show this. N times the expectation of the derivative of log z with respect to h1. In fact, you squared. Okay, so the variance of this object is smaller than n or equal to n. It's easy to show that this is bounded because that will give you the expectation of s. S is a plus minus 1 variable. And so the variance is indeed smaller than n. If you divide by n here, the variance will be 1 over n. So this seems like a good idea. Let's compute the average of log z. And that tells you whatever will happen for a very large sample of the problem. Okay? Yes? Say this again.
Do you put a 1 over n in front of the second term, the addition?
No, I want things to be extensive. So this is somehow order n. Okay. This is order 1, but there is n here. So for this model, this is how I define it. I think it's correct. Of course, if you are putting this on a lattice, you have to think a bit how to normalize things. But this is what is called a fully connected problem, and in that case, this is the correct normalization. All right, so this is easy. The free energy concentrates, no problem. All right, so what is the replica method? The replica method is just essentially that. How to compute the expectation of log of z. Now, the reason why you need the replica method is that, well, computing the expectation of z is not so hard. Computing the expectation of log of z is tedious. And what you do is to say, well, you know, log z, how different it is from the limit when n going to 0 of this. They should be very close. This is called the replica trick. And if you doubt it, trick is to say, well, that is exponential of n log z, and when n is small, it's 1 plus log z. So if you remove 1, you divide by n, it should be OK. Fine. So I can put 1 over n here, 1 over n here, expectation here. And now the only thing that you have to do is to compute the expectation of z to the power n. Okay, so that was the idea that was given by Katz to Sam Edwards. And Sam Edwards started a whole new field in 74, 75 on this problem, on his paper on vulcanization. And then he has a second paper on spin glasses that essentially created our field. So why is it good? Well, it's good because one thing you know to do very easily is to compute the expectation of Zn with n integer. And then since we are physicists, we say, well, we can do this, and then we say, how different could it be if n is not integer and it's a continuous variable? And of course, nothing can happen, right, Gerard? Yeah, what can go wrong? And then you say, fine, it's n is not an integer anymore, it's a continuous variable, and then I send it to 0, and it's going to be OK. And that's what the replica method is. OK? So let's apply the replica method to our problem. Can I erase? Oh, I should have said this. I have a set of notes. If you go on the website, there is a link, and you probably will find the most of what I'm telling you today. All right, so how does it work? Well, let's take some space. Let's compute z to the power n. And n is integer. So it's really computing z for a number of copy of z. Or if you want, a number of clone, or if you want, a number of replica. This is where the problem is coming from. So you are summing over n replica. So alpha is going from 1 to n. And for each of them, you should sum over all the 2 to the n configuration of spins. So we'll note it this way. It's not really good, but right. So this is a sum for all Si on replica 1, sum over all Si on replica 2, and so on and so forth until replica n. For each of them, I should put my Boltzmann factor, which is minus beta h. So I have again a product that goes from 1 to n here. And in my exponential, we have beta. First term is n over 2 sum over I Si alpha divided by n squared plus, yeah, I think I have a minus here. It doesn't change anything because the distribution of h is symmetric, but see how easy it is to change things. All right, so it's a plus here, plus beta hi, so beta sum over I hi. All right, now the hi's are the same for all replica. Okay, all replica have the same disorder. Good. Yeah, good point. It's a bad notation, but I want this product is applied to this guy and this product applied to this guy, okay? So I should have parentheses if you want. But if I don't do it this way, then I get lost at some point. So, all right. That's correct. Good. So how are we going to do this? So the way physicists do it is by not doing it. It's already, of course, you could be doing it. It's not so hard. But typically, what we like to do is to introduce delta functions. That's all we do. So instead of doing this computation here, we are going to say, well, you know what? We are going to integrate, to put n delta functions that will force, all right, that will force Si to be equal to m alpha with n here. Actually, I should put an m here as well, if you want to be correct. Okay, I'm doing it just to show you how it's done in replica article. You actually don't need this here. It's important to do it. Now, if I have this delta function, I can replace sum over Si by n m alpha. All right, so now I have my measure here. I have my, okay. I want to make sure that J'ai oublié un quoi? Thank you, Gérard. All right, now we have our Boltzmann factors here. And this guy is just m alpha squared. Good. And unfortunately, we still have this part here. Okay, now the next step in virtually all computations is to say, well, I don't like to work with a delta. I will use the Fourier representation of a delta function. It is to say that the delta function is the integral of its Fourier transform. So then the next steps that you find is something like this. Let's take this n here. Actually, this n here will play absolutely no role. And now we have this hat variable. The physicists like to call the hat variable. Of course, it's a terrible notation if you're doing statistics, because in statistics, hat is given to estimators. But OK, what can we do? I just don't want to lie to you. I'm telling you how it's done. And this delta here is becoming this. Okay. I will put the sum over alpha here. And this guy doesn't change. Okay, that looks like a very complicated way of doing things, but this is the one you have to do if you want to follow these computations. Soon, it will become simpler. All right. Let's see what I can change here. Well, one thing I can do is to rearrange slightly things. You see that I have some variable that depend on the SIs and some that do not. Okay? So let's put together the people that depend on the SI and those that do not. And we are almost done, by the way. Okay, we have our integration here. Here we have the nice guy that do not depend on the spins. And you see that everything here is extensive in n, large n. This is why I choose a normalization. And here we have the terms that depend on the spin. Yes? Yes, very good. So, thank you, Marilou. It's there as well. Of course, it's there as well. And now all that do not depend on the sum over alphas. Okay, so I'll put back my product. And the nice thing is that now here there is a sum over one guy. And we have beta hi si alpha minus I m alpha hat si alpha. All right, so by using these deltas, things I've simplified a lot. Okay, it's true that I have to pay because I have all these terms here, but it's not so bad. But now here I have a single spin problem. So I can really sum this. And, well, this is twice the hyperbolic cosine of beta hi minus I m alpha hat. Okay, so that's the essence of all these mean field computations in physics. You introduce this delta to get rid of these nasty sums. You cannot always do that, but when the model is mean field, whatever this means, you can do it, and you know, essentially that's the definition of mean field for many physicists, which is a terrible definition because everyone has a different definition of what mean fields mean. So it's nice. We have, you know, we got rid of these 2 to the n summations, and that's certainly good. Fine. What do we need to do? Well, we need to compute the averages. Right? Remember, I need to compute the expectation of z to the n over the field. Okay, so the expectation is here, is here, is here. But here you see there is really nothing that depends on it. It can go inside this product over I because all the hi are independent. It cannot go inside the product of a replica because all replica alpha have the same hi. So that means the expectation is now here. All right, seems like we have an expectation of this product of the replicas. But since the expectation is over H, this and x here doesn't matter anymore. So that's what happened in replica. You get rid of this explicit dependence over you know, a different set of random variable, but at the price of coupling the n replica. It's always like this. This is a trivial example, but it's always going like this. And now, since this doesn't depend on I, well, you have an n here. All right. Actually, so far, what I have done makes sense, even from point of view of math. You will need to write it with a bit more care, but it's okay. I have not cheated too much. Now comes the real funny part. So we need to make this integration here, and come on, it's, it seems a bit of work. Life's too short. Do I really want to do all these integral? Besides, it's a bit weird because then n is going to 0, so it's an infinite, it's a finite number of integral that goes to 0. It's not clear what it means. So we probably should try to do our hocus pocus now. All right, so the hocus pocus is to say, of course, you have something like the replica symmetry hypothesis that will work. It's obvious. It's really obvious that it will work. What it means is to say, well, when you will do this integral here, well, what you have is the exponential of n. Thus, you can put also the exponential. So it's exponential of n, large n, times the function. N will go to infinity. So we'll have to do a saddle point equation. It will be dominated by only one of these values. Makes sense. Okay, it's not a Laplace integral, by the way, because that's I have an I here. It's a saddle point, but it still makes sense. And, the m alpha and the m alpha hat that will dominate, it's obvious that they will all be the same for all replica, right? It's obvious. So we want to say that all m alpha will be 1 m, and the m alpha hat will be 1 m hat. All right. This is true here, as you will see, but this is far from obvious. And in fact, this is where things come very complicated for more serious replica computation. You have something that is called replica symmetry breaking. And actually, this part is OK, because that's a magnetization. But once you have overlap between different replica, which, by the way, do not appear here, you can have a lot of bad things that happens. All right, so if we assume this, what is going on here? Well, this integral here is replaced by something simpler. This product here, well, you know, they're all the same here, so it's really something you can write exponential of small n times big N times this. And here, well, it's a product over alpha, but they are all the same. So his expectation, I should be a bit careful. My expectation is here. So it's power small n. All right, and this is really something you have to do if you want to make this computation doable, to make an assumption about which saddle point you will get. And this is the most natural assumption. Okay, I should say that this is really, really not trivial. In fact, the trouble with replica method is that when you want to say, fine, I compute everything with n integer, and I want to do an analytic computation prolongation with n continuous and send n to 0, it's actually not well defined. There are many possible continuations, and it's not a well-defined problem, so you have to guess it. And this is what physicists did. OK, it's almost nice. So the last thing I have to do is to say, well, you know, you have an expectation of something here, but n, you remember, will be sent to 0 at the end of the day. So we might as well do a little trick. You know, you say, well, it's expectation of this, called this big thing x. The expectation of x to the n, when n is small, well, the same as the expectation. Well, that is true. But now, when n is small, OK, what can go wrong here? Expectation of x to the n is equal to expectation of n expectation of log x. It's obvious. So this can go very, very wrong. Okay? So when n is going to 0, it looks right. But you know, if you think of what this means, it means some really strong concentration properties for x. And the nice thing about replica is that sending n to 0 is telling you, well, it should be OK because of this. But it's really telling you that somehow the concentration of random variables should enter the game if you want to prove result here. And this is also somehow telling you that, well, this magnetization here should concentrate on one given value, and it hints to the fact that you will have to care about it. All right, so we are really done. You can write the first result here. OK. So first of all, I don't care about this n, large n, to the power small n. Why? Yes, but this n will be super small too here. Yes, I mean, the real reason is that this is n log n, and everything here is n times large n. Okay, and when I will do my my Laplace trick, my integral, my saddle point, it will not matter. Okay, so let's be a physicist here. So it's basically equal to that. And now we have the result of the replica method. I m hat m plus beta m squared over 2 plus, and now you see that this guy is exponential n, there is a power n here, so it's everything is good. Exponential, sorry, expectation of the log of 2 cosh beta h minus e m hat. Can I erase everything? Yes? Okay, so this is a typical, well, it's not a typical, it's an easy replica computation, but I want to stress that all the steps that I have taken, that I have done, are essentially the one that you are doing in a real one. Now it looks nice. Of course, you're physicists, so you don't care too much about in which order you send n to 0 and a large n to infinity, even though when you think about it, it looks that there could be a lot of funny things going on here. But if I do this integral here by sending n to infinity first and still keeping n small but finite, well, you see that this will be given by the exponential of the extremum of this function over m and m hat. Okay? So I don't want to carry the m hat all the time, so let's try to do one of these extremizations. For instance, if I do the extremization with m, it tells me that I should have high m hat equal to minus beta m when I do the extremization. Okay? So that actually it's a maximum, so it's a max over m of a function called phi rs of m and phi rs of m. All right, so I have done this. So this guy becomes minus beta m here. So the first term is minus beta m squared here. You have beta h plus m. Okay, and say that again?
You don't care that m was supposed to belong to -1.
Yes, I don't. And magically, I expect it's going to be okay. I should indeed, you know, if you want to do it carefully, you should actually care. Magically, if you plot this function, the maximum of m is always between -1 and 1. Sorry, why do I do an extremization here?
Yeah.
Well, because when n is going to infinity, this will be dominated by a maximum. So it's the saddle point method. Saddle point. Right? So this guy, I obtain it by making the derivative with respect to m. Now, what I should have done is that since I extremate it with respect to m, is to keep only the m hat. But that's not what physicists do. They replug this one here. It looks nicer, and they say that this guy is the correct one.
And then why max?
It so happened to be a max here. But indeed, it doesn't have to be because, you know. Exactly, I agree.
So you just have to look at the pretty good.
I agree. It's just so happened that it's a max.
Yeah, really.
Indeed. Indeed, for more serious computation, the fact that it was a max or a mean like puzzled physicists for a while. But indeed, if you want to, you know, I have done a lot of things in a nasty way here. The way I did this change of variable here, if you want to do it carefully, there is a quotient, there is a line on the complex plane that you have to deform this line, you know, and you have to go through saddle point. And you know. Actually, until now, except from the replica symmetry hypothesis, it's not entirely crazy. I have not done some too much wrong math.
But here you could have just integrated in m.
Yes.
M, let leave them
Yes.
half aside, and then you have just a Gaussian integral.
Yes.
Except except it has the wrong variance sign.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
and then this would just be a completely exact formula.
Yes, as I tell you, the VES model, you can do everything exactly. But I like to show it this way because that's what you see in books of replica. But yeah, you're totally right. Okay, and this is a very simple formula. Yeah, you have an expectation here, but it's just an integration of a Gaussian variable. So you do it numerically, and voila. I mean, and now, well, now it's easy. You take n small, and it's obvious that the limit when n is going to infinity and n is going to 0, and I'm not telling you the order because I'm a physicist right now. And of course, it's obvious that 1 over n Zn minus 1 divided by n, this will be equal to the max of phi rs of n. It's obvious. Now here I have done a lot of crazy stuff because now I send n to be small, which is not really, I did all my computation with n integer, so it's shaky. I'm somehow a bit, really, really not caring too much about the order of this limit, but that's odd. And so when mathematicians were shown this thing, they were, well, justifully skeptical.
So essentially there you were saying that n times n goes to infinity, afterwards n times n.
Yeah, I kind of switched the limit without telling you. And that is what all we did. And interestingly, there don't seem to be a problem here. People thought that was the problem, but seems okay. In fact, as far as we know, all this computation, as long as you make the correct guess here, which can be much more complicated than this, and the person who told us how to make the correct guess for complicated problems is Giorgio Parisi in his 82 paper. That seems to be always working. And one thing maybe we would like to know, if mathematicians were actually good people, they will tell us, that's okay, you can do this. So Gérard, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there have been any progress in trying to prove the method like this way.
In a replica symmetry case, now we think.
Yeah, of course we can prove. I mean, I'm going to prove this result now. It's easy. But what we really, really would like, there is an expectation here. What we really would like is to know that this is okay, and we can go in replica space, average, and send n to 0, and I don't think that there is anything like this. And it seems to be hard, and maybe this is not a good idea at all. I don't know. But this is not where the mathematical progress came. The mathematical progress came by staring at this for some time, and to think, well, if this is the correct result, maybe I can obtain it in a different way and get it rigorously. And of course, it helps to have the correct result. It has always helped. That's tradition in mathematics. Actually, it goes back to Archimedes. There is a beautiful book, one of the few that we have from Archimedes, which is called The Method of Mechanical Theorems. And he's trying to solve a problem, a very complicated problem of geometry. I'll post it on the site. And he found the solution by thinking, okay, but if I put some pulley here, and if I plug by equilibrium of forces, that should be this. And once he got the answer, then he proved it by rigorous means, which at the time means geometry, of course. And he has this beautiful sentence. I think this idea to get the result by physics mean and that get it rigorously is perhaps one of my biggest contributions to the future of science. Okay, so if it was good enough for Archimedes, certainly good enough for me. All right, so we are going now to try to be like Archimedes and to see how we can prove this. Then, yeah, it's a good moment for questions. Any questions?
Quick one.
Yes.
Can you go back to the change of variable that you made?
Here?
No, I am hat equals to yeah, that one.
Yes. That I got by saying I should take the extremization here. So I derive all this with respect to hem of that, and I put it to 0. And that gives me this condition. We can work with phi rs m and m hat here, and that will be still okay. But it's actually simpler to prove directly this. So Yes.
You said that this is very standard. You can use it for many problems.
Yes.
When we did, there was a term that you said it does not depend on I because it was the expectation, and then you have the parentheses and
Yeah.
to power n. You can do that only if the HI are independent, right?
Yes.
Is there anything you can do if the HI are not?
Well, find the change of variable such that something is independent. But you know, physicists and mathematicians like independent variable. And then maybe you wave your hand very fast and saying, of course, if you are not depending too much, it's going to be okay. And you can do a lot of things afterwards. There are actually rigorous techniques that allows you to change Gaussian variable to not too many correlated variables. And you can prove universality of this thing. In this case, it's one of the cases I'm not sure it works, because you see the expectation here is explicit. For instance, if H was not Gaussian but plus or minus 1, it will not give you the same answer. So it's one of those problems where you don't have universality. So probably here it's going to be harder. But yes, this is not a magic trick. The fact that things factorize was really due to the fact I was using a fully connected problem and independent IIDs out of fields. Yes?
But this holds whatever distribution H is from, right?
In everything I've done here, yes, I don't think I actually used the fact that H was Gaussian. I used the fact that it was independent. So.
But the replica symmetry assumption is true for every distribution, or does it matter if
I think it's going to be for, well, we are going to see in the proof, but I think it's going to be true for any, in this case, which is, again, a trivial toy case. It's true for any factorized distribution of H. So if you are all taken independently from the same distribution, it's going to be okay. All right, so let's keep that. And somehow we need to keep this guy, because that's somehow what we want to prove. Yes, thank you, Gerard. All right, so now we forget about physics, and we try to be more cautious and think of this problem as a mathematician. All right, how are we going to prove such a result? So there have been 40 years of work in mathematics on this disordered system. One of the most important techniques is the one called interpolation. And this is the one I'm going to show you. Okay, and in the context of spin glass, it's due to Francesco Guerra, who is an Italian mathematical physicist, and who proposed that, and then it was picked up by many people, and that is the kind of techniques was used by, well, notably by Talagrand when he proved that the replica solution for the Sherrington-Kirkpatrick model was correct. Again, interpolation techniques can, they come in many flavors. It can get very tricky. But since this is a simple problem, maybe there is some hope that I can do it in half an hour or so. All right. How does it work? Well, it works by interpolating. It's a mask or interpolation. Thank you. By interpolation, you are going to start with a model which is easy, solve it, and then slightly change this model to interpolate between this model and the one you actually want to solve. That's the name interpolation. And it's something that you see a lot in, in probability. It's something you can use to prove a lot of results. I think sometimes people call it the smart path technique. there are many ways how to do it. All right, so this is how we do it. So let's stare at this for a while. So the idea is to say, fine, let's pick up a model. Those free energy is easy to compute and look like that. And then we're going to change it so that it will look like this one when it becomes the problem we look for. Okay? So how should we choose our starting point? Well, I don't know about you, but this part it looks a bit tedious. So probably it's a good idea if I start from a model where this is the actual free energy. Okay? All right, so this is how it's done. Yes?
What are you trying to prove here? That this is the correct
I want to prove that this is the correct expectation of log z when n is going to infinity for the random field Ising model. Maximum, and you also need to have the maximum appearing in the proof. Otherwise, I'm cheating. And you will get it. You will get the max. So let's go. So what I'm going to do, is to define the new cost function that depends on something called time. It's not a real time, but think of it as time. Or if you want, an interpolating variable. And this is what I'm going to do. Okay, it will be sum over I, Si, well, I need Hi, and I put the m here, and m now is just a variable. It can be whatever. Okay? So my problem is parameterized by t and m. I have 1 minus t here, plus t, no, minus t, n, sum over I, Si divided by n, square. Okay? Now, when t is equal to 1, I have something. No, there is a plus here. Okay. Now, while t is equal to 1, what is this? It's that. Okay? So at t equal 1, at time 1, this is the actual cost function that you are interested about. All right? What is it at t equals 0? At t equals 0, well, it's certainly simpler. So I just sum over I. This part is not here. Good. I have Si, Hi, plus m. Okay? What is the free energy of this problem? Well, that's easy. Okay? It's just everything is independent. It's a problem of independent spin. So if you write the log z divided by n here, you will find, wow, it's really, that it's indeed log of cosh 2 beta m plus hi okay, let's call it z0. Okay, that's a trivial computation because you should choose something easy at time 0. And if you take the expectation over the field here, well, really what it does is just to give you this. All right, so this is nice because at t equals 0, the free energy of this problem is really equal to this. And the nice thing is that now I can put an n here. Well, by the way, well, now we have to be careful about the limit n going to infinity. So let's denote the fact that it's an Hamiltonian partition with n spin. Well, whatever n, this is it. Right? Because these are independent spins, so it doesn't depend on it. All right, now what is the interpolation method? Well, I'm going to try to interpolate between time 0 and time 1. and hoping that the only thing that will change is that this term will appear. Okay, how do you do this? Oh yeah, maybe the... Here. Merci Gérard. That looks like a very, you know, like, and then, oh my God, it doesn't work. Yes, of course, there is a 1/2 here. There is a 1/2. Okay, how do you do that? How do you interpolate? Well, we come back to Newton, or more precisely Leibniz.
What is the power of this partition?
It's not the power, okay? It's a partition function at time 0 with n spin.
And you will change this?
I will work all the time with n finite because you see, now we need to be careful about the existence of limit. Okay, you know, if you want to do it properly, you have to work with n and then to make sure that the limit n going to infinity is well defined and it exists and everything. Right? We don't have to care too much about concentration because that we know is fine, but otherwise we have to be very careful about the limit. All right, so what we are going to write is the fact that okay, so phi n, which is what we want, is the free energy with n spin, okay, which is the expectation of log z at time 1 with n spin divided by n. Well, we are just going to write the fundamental theorem of calculus, that something at time 1 is equal to the same thing at time 0 plus the integral of the derivative between the two. Okay? So we still have expectation here. Well, first of all, we have the term that t equals 0, which, interestingly enough, is just this one. All right, and now we have plus, we have our expectation, we have the integral from 0 to 1, dt, and here we have the derivative of log z of t by t. Okay? And so now we are really hoping that we can do this computation, and this will give us minus m squared over 2. That cannot be so easy, because right now m is just a parameter I invented. So somehow I need to have the max coming, appearing at some point, otherwise it doesn't work. And let's hope that it will work. All right, so let's do this derivation. So the derivative of the log is easily done. And in fact, well, the derivative of the log is 1 over z times the derivative of z. The derivative of z with respect to time, well, you see that it will have some minus beta going down with these terms which are here. Okay? So actually what you get is minus beta, and you have the expectation of the derivative of the Hamiltonian. Okay, I mean, this is what happens all the time when we derive log z. Well, the nice thing is that it's easy to make the derivatives of the Hamiltonian, and what we find, well, it's you know, there's a t here that will give us a m times psi. There is a t here that will give us this guy. And so what you really get here, and it's the moment I should really be careful not making mistakes. So let's take the beta here. And I have my expectation, dt, 1 over 2. No. Okay, so I have the expectation of sum over I, Si over n. Right? This expectation is taken at time t. Okay, it's with this Hamiltonian and time t. And it's taken from a set of fields. Okay, and I have another term plus 1/2 sum over I Si over n squared. And again, this is expectation times t with some set of h. And this expectation is of an h. All right? So that doesn't look too bad, except that we have no way how to compute that. Probably forgot a m somewhere. There should be a m. I don't like this if there is no m. Yes, there should be a m here. Right, so when I derive this guy, there is a sum over I Si m minus, but there is a minus, so it kills it. There was a minus here, so there is a minus. Yeah, good. Okay, this is the correct thing. And now you can stare at this for a while and think that, well, I don't know what to do. Okay, and in fact, there is something to do, which is, if you're a good mathematician, you should see it. Well, obviously, this looks like a squared that is not complete. Okay, there is something like this, and here you have the same guy in times m. So it looks like it's m minus sum of I of Si squared missing something. Okay, so let's complete the square. Okay, and if I am not wrong, we have that. M minus sum over I Si over n squared. And magically, we have minus m squared over 2 here.
What happens to terms SI, HI?
To which one?
SI into HI. So in the Hamiltonian repeat, you have.
Oh, that's still in the measure here. Okay? But remember, when I derive, what I'm computing is a derivative of log z. And that gives me actually the expectation of the derivative of the Hamiltonian. So things that do not depend on t went away. All right, so the good news is that I have this term here. So now I see that phi n is equal to phi rs of m, because I can have that guy and that guy, plus, and now I really, really hope that I didn't screw up the signs. We have the expectation of the square of that.
What's the role of m here?
This is true for all m.
This is supposed to be true for all m.
Yes. And now, of course, you might say, well, I'm going to choose m to be equal to that, and this goes to 0. But of course, I can do this because this is a random variable. But of course, you know that this random variable is concentrating on m, so it should be OK, and that could be one way of proving it, but we're going to see this later on.
So phi n, phi capital M, the left-hand side,
Yes.
does not depend on m.
Exactly. So this should be true for all m.
So this function is in fact a constant.
No. Yes. Which, by the way, is not totally obvious
Yeah.
either. But yes. So one thing you could say is that, haha, let's compute the derivative and see what's going on. But the derivative is actually something that gives you the third order correlation. And I have never seen anyone actually proving this directly. But yes, this should not this doesn't depend on m. And so, you know, the derivative here is equal to that. All right. And now, well, we have something amazing. What do we have? Exactly. We have half of the problem solved for us, because this is positive. I don't know what this is, but it's positive. And that's indeed, that's exactly what Guerra did. And now we have this amazing result that phi n is larger for all n, mind you, which is also great because you don't have to worry about limits. It's true at all n, at that phi rs of m. And in particular, and this is for Gérard, if it is true for all m, certainly true for the max. All right, so that was essentially, in a sense, the Guerra interpolation method, and this is surprisingly effective. I mean, here it's few lines. You know, it gets a bit more complicated once you look at more complicated problems. But really, what did I do? You know, I mean, it's just derivatives, and frankly, it doesn't get much more complicated than that. And it's super powerful, except it's not. It's powerful because you are lucky that there is a square here. Okay, if there was power 3, with a power 4, power 5. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's certainly nice when it does, and here it does, and we have half of the proof ready. Okay, questions? Okay, so how to do the other part? Okay, now the other part, you have to work a bit more. And there are many ways how to do it. And I will tell you about one that we developed with Ahmed El Alawi. I'm writing wrong. How do you spell this, Gerard? You probably should know it. Ah? Oh, okay, good. And that was something we did in 2 years ago. We didn't do it for this problem, of course, but it's a nice trick that works very well. And if I have time, I mean, it will take me 10 minutes, so I don't know if I will have time. I could tell you a bit about the one that was invented by Jean Barbier, Nicolas Macris, and Léo Miolan, which is really clever, but it requires a bit more work. All right, so this is what we did with Ahmed. We said, you know, why do you compute phi n? You should look at another object. You should look at phi n with fixed magnetization. So let's call it phi n fixed. And what it means is expectation over the field, 1 over n, log. And instead of what you will get normally, which is a sum over all possible configuration of S of exponential minus beta h, well, we are fixing the magnetization. How do you fix the magnetization? You put an indicator function, but you keep only configuration where sum over Si over n is equal to big M. Okay? So this is a free energy for a problem where the magnetization, so it is the average value of the sum of the spins, is equal to large M. Right? Physicists compute this thing usually through a Legendre transform. They call it the Franz-Parisi potential. And it's something that you get a lot if you compute things like large deviation functions. In fact, this is the thing that arise in large deviations studies. And you can write this as a Kullback-Leiber divergences. Never mind this. All right, the problem is now the interesting. The problem is the following. How do you compute that? Well, with Guerra interpolation, of course. So let's see what's changed here. The first part here does not change. Well, it kind of does, because here I did not use the fact that here I sum over all possible values of the spins. Okay? So somehow, if I replace at t equals 0 the fixed magnetization by this one, well, this one is certain, you know, this is the free energy of the problem at time 0 with all magnetization, including the one at fixed. So it's certainly larger because there's some over more configurations of something positive. So I need to compute time zero part of this thing. I will do it by interpolation. So the first thing I should do is to compute the partition sum of this problem at time zero. I could do it, actually. It's not so hard. We fix magnetization. That's life too short. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to say, look, the problem with fixed magnetization has a free energy, has a log z, that is certainly smaller than the log z of the problem without fixed magnetization. Because without fixed magnetization, I'm summing over all possible value of the spins of something positive, so I will have something which is larger. Right? So it's smaller than, well, I have this thing. And what about the second part? Second part will go exactly the same, except this is the magnetization. We can take only one value, which is big M. Okay, so the second part is expectation of integral, oh wait, sorry, that will be, of course, by minus m squared over 2 beta. And then I have the part under the integral. Okay? All right, life's too short. I will not keep this. I will just write, well, this is phi rs. Okay? And now I have the rest. And the rest is not so hard because, you know, I have m minus, but, you know, I don't need this expectation because that's really m. And I can even do the integral if I want. But I will not even do the integral. That will be overdo it. I will work with one particular value of small m, because remember, this is true for all small m. So in particular, this is true if small m is equal to large M. Okay, so in particular, yeah, I'm writing this, and then I'm all yours. Yes? Say that again, louder.
What depends on P?
P. T.
Yes. You take away the expectation sign, that's what depends on P.
Yes, it's true, but at all time, I have my indicator function that says that I'm considering only magnetization which are equal to M. So this thing here is always equal to M in my sums now, in my expectations.
So the integral becomes independent of P.
Yes. It's actually 0 because now I will use small m equal to large M. And so I have that. Now, the fixed one is smaller than phi rs of M. Now you see that you're almost done. It will be, because it will be great to bound this guy by the maximum of M. I will do it in a few minutes, but yeah, it's short, and I will be cheating a bit. But you agree with this computation? All right, now, obviously, log z over n for the RFEM divided by n, it's smaller. Okay, how many value there could be of magnetization? 2n, I think, or 2n plus 1, or something like this. Okay? So, smaller than 2n, it's smaller than the log of 2n times z max magnetization. So, now what I do is the following. I compute z for all possible fixed magnetization. Okay? I pick up the max. And certainly, if I replace my integral over all magnetization over 2n times the max, well, it goes in this direction. Okay? And since I divide by n here, you see that let's give you log of Z max for fixed magnetization equal to M max over M, let's call it M star, divided by N, plus something which is log of 2N divided by N, so plus little O1. Now we're almost done, because this was before making an average. And actually, making the average is not entirely trivial here. But, if you put the expectation here over H, it seems that you should put the expectation here, and that's OK, because then this is really this object, and we are done. You have to be a bit careful, because this max here could depend on the particular value of H. OK, it doesn't, because this thing concentrates for every M. What we did for concentration also works, so it's fine. And if you do this, then you see that this guy is bounded by this, and this guy is larger than that. And finally, you have the sandwich. Phi n is larger than the max over m phi rs of m, and it is smaller than the max of phi rs of m plus little o1. And when n is going to infinity, the little one goes to 0, and you're done, and you have solved the problem. Okay? So it's really cute, and that's one, that's one way it works. So what I want to put your attention on is that you have to be a bit more clever to do this, and this other bound is really the hard one. Right? And this is a Laplace principle. For physicists, that will be obvious that if you fix that fixed magnetization, of course you have to maximize it, but you have to prove it if you want to do it. Okay, question? I think I have 5 minutes later, and I can tell you the one developed by my friend in EPFL. So the fixed magnetization is smaller than this one. And the fixed magnetization is itself larger than the true one. And so, of course, I have a little O1 here, because it cannot be true for all n in both sides. That will be a bit too much, because that will mean that at any finite n, it's correct. And it's not, of course. Okay, the little of O1 is, it's log of 2n over n.
So the fact that it's replica symmetric here is hidden there. It's in the fact that the mean, sum of SI divided by n, does concentrate. And that gives measure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but the reason why all this is... oh, by the way, this is also a way to prove concentration. That gives you the concentration of m to... and it's also a way to give you the large deviation of m, which is great. And they are exponentially small, by the way, because... so, again, the reason why this is replica symmetric here is that the disorder is coupling only SI. It's not coupling SI, SJ, what you would have for a spin glass. And so I don't even have overlaps here.
So what plays the role of the overlap is the mean.
Yeah, which concentrates, so everything is easy. So, good point. Now, I have in my notes the same computation for a problem which is a rank 1 perturb matrix problem, which is something that was solved also by these two notable mathematicians. And you can get it from replica as well. It's a real replica computation. It's slightly more complicated, not much, but a bit more complicated than this one, in the fact that you have overlaps. And that's what makes it interesting. These two proofs go through, but you will see that you have to work a bit. Because now you will get this term plus another one. They don't have the same sign, so you have to be a bit careful to make them work. And the exercise is given in my notes. So please redo the computation, and you can also redo the proof. It's a good exercise. All right. Boss, do I have 5 minutes? You talk 4 minutes, 5 minutes. OK. So I just want to mention briefly a very interesting idea that was developed by Jean Barbier and Nicolas Macris in EPFL, And it's really quite clever. At first, I thought that would be the thing that changed everything, and it kind of does, because we are able to prove things that we are not able to prove before. But it requires some work. So what they say is the following. Wouldn't it be better here to try to say, look, this guy is equal to this guy, and this is 0 directly? That would be great, okay? And so they tried to find a way to do this, and what they did was to use something called, so I just give their name. So it's Jean Barbier, Nicolas Macris. Same year, they also had help from Léo Miolan. And then we worked with them to extend this. So it's quite clever. What they say is the following. We are going to use for interpolation something a bit more complicated, but not too much. Right? They say we keep the hi, but now we integrate from t to 1. We write m tau d tau. And so m, that was before a scalar, is now a function. And the rest stays the same. Okay. So this is called the adaptive interpolation. And really, it sounds like, oh yeah, it's obvious. Of course you should do it. So what does it change? Well, it changed only one thing. This guy is now m of t. Okay? So you can redo the whole thing. That's the only thing it changes. And so then there are two steps which I won't do. But it's interesting to know how it works. Well, the first thing is to see that this guy is concentrating to a deterministic value. So you want to replace this with expectation of its average. So first you have to prove concentration. So it's not too hard. Actually, the way you do this is by putting a small external field, and for almost all value of the external field, this thing concentrates. And then you have to be a bit careful, and you have to show that it exists a sequence of external field that goes to 0. You have to work a bit, but that's the first thing you have to do. Even you can replace this by that. And then what is the second one? Well, you say, well, fine. Now we'll choose m of t as the expectation of sum over Si over n at all time t. And if you stare at this is actually also a function of m of t. So this is a differential equation. And you can prove it has a solution by using Picard existence theorem, or which is also called the Cauchy-Lipschitz. And that's the second part. So it looks great. It's a really cool method. And it sounds that, that's the way to do. And it is. But you have to work. And in fact, it's a bit of work, because by proving concentration, you're saying, OK, this should be true for a subsequence of small field. But then you say, haha, but this equation should depend at every time on the small field I had. And so maybe it kind of break Picard existence theorem. And so you have to work. And in fact, first time we applied it, we made it wrong. And so it's a bit subtle. I mean, it's not undoable. So you have to be careful to do it well. But if you can do these two, then you just say, well, then I choose this equal. Well, this is going to 0 when n is going to infinity, and voila. This is also done in the notes by Jean and Nicolas, which I posted on my HTML.
So initially, the nice thing is that this phi n was equal to something, a function of m, which was n.
It goes away, of course, because this concentration is something where you will prove only when n is going to infinity.
So what we had before, that the right-hand side depended on m, but in fact did not depend on m. And here the right-hand side depended on m, which is a And
Yeah.
it does not depend on M.
And the great thing is that, of course, the solution to that is m equal constant. Yeah, which is not obvious, but so it's really, you know, if you look to this paper that they wrote, and then we wrote some with them, it's really annoying because that part is few pages, and then you have 50 pages for that and that, just to show that, you know, that thing that should concentrate, and that m is a constant, which is really frustrating. But that's still quite a clever idea. And the nice thing about that is that certainly you don't need this guy to be a square or power 3 or power 4. And in fact, this thing can be very complicated. As long as you can prove concentration, it's fine. And that's a technique we used also with Lenka and Leo to prove many results in compressed sensing, GLMs, and everything. So it's really using this adaptive interpolation method, which is quite clever, but you know.
Would that exist for spin glasses?
Yes, it should, but again, you will, yeah, please. I answer and then I let you. You know, again, for a real spin glass, you will have M of t, a Q of t, and so again, it's all about proving concentrations, which you should expect because that's what we assume in the physics computation. That, oh yeah, you know, of course, Q is concentrating one guy. Oh no, it's one RSB, it has two value. So you expect this thing to be true, and if you can prove them, well, you cannot prove the method. But what is really tedious here is, you know, you need to solve this, and again, to have this small field coupled going to 0 at the same time, and doing the two together is, well, I'm not a real mathematician, so it scared me, and it gets tedious. Of course, it's something that is interesting if you, as a real math problem. But it gets this is where it gets interesting. Yes?
Can I change tau to, I don't know, Q?
Aha. Yes.
It reminds me of, I mean, like doing a kind of control on the Hamiltonian that you are. So imagine that you want to get, for example, the down state, then you start from a simple Hamiltonian, when, I don't know, where you can get the down state, and then you want the down state of a much harder Hamiltonian, so you kind of do a control on the perturbation that you have, you bring it to the, from the clear Hamiltonian to the one that you
Yeah.
compute, and this equation of M of t, that is just the materialization, should become the x of q.
Indeed, you have a Q of t and you have x of q here that happens in the replica, of course. That's exactly what is going on.
So when you make this characteristic 2, where is the max coming from?
Yes, good point. Where is the max coming from here? Well, you will realize that the solution to this is obtained when when you maximize the rest.
Okay, so
So it happens as a consequence of course, you know, you write this, but then you have to analyze what this is doing. All right, and you realize that this condition is indeed the same as having. In fact, you know, if you derive this with respect to m here, you will get that. Yes.
to prove concentration, is it enough to prove that the deviations are exponentially small in n, or is it
That will be enough, but we are usually not able to do this. Here we are able to do it, by the way, here, with these techniques. Here, the way you do this, usually this concentration is you put an external field, okay, and then you use fluctuation dissipation and say, okay, the derivative of the field is the variance, and since the field is bounded, then you get something, but it usually gives you rates which are 1 over n, 1 over square root of n, that kind of rates, which are not optimal. And it happens a lot that you get the rate that you wanted, you know, 1 over n squared, but you cannot get it, and then the proof doesn't work. So, you know, there is an art of doing this. And it's always by adding some fields and, or measurement and side information. There is an art to that. Yes, you go. Speak up, I did not understand. If you are clever, probably. Being a limited physicist, I want to know the answer first, and that's what I do. But probably you can guess it. I know Jean is really trying to do that.
But the guess will depend on the number of replicas you need to work.
Yeah, of course, of course. And you know, if you are really courageous, you might want to do this on a sparse problem, and then all these functions become functionals, and then the control is complicated, and you know, but I like the simplest version of the problem to tell the story. But I'm not aware of anyone getting a non-trivial result that was not obtained by physics first in this thing. You probably can, you know, if you're smart. There are probably some instances when people have done this, but you know, I mean, this is a very recent method anyway, so probably, you know, there's probably a way to turn this into a full tools that, you know, that tell you this is what you need to do and that will always work. But I don't know how to do it. What, you know, I will use Archimedes method, you know, method of mechanical theorems. Okay, so thank you. Now I name all of you expert in replica theory and proofs. So next time I will tell you about machine learning and replica, and I will just give you replica formula, and you will believe me. And if you don't, you just have to redo these marvelous steps, and that will be okay. So thank you, everyone, and I think we have a small lunch break, snack break.